"Come on, Rebecca. We are not stopping again until we get there," Marcus shouted from the driver's seat, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. I sat in the back of his pickup truck, sandwiched between his brothers Nathan and Austin, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. The desert heat was already unbearable at 9 a.m., and we still had hours left on this road trip to Las Vegas that I never wanted to take in the first place. My name is Rebecca Torres. I am 33 years old, and I have been married to Marcus Collins for 3 years. What started as a loving relationship had slowly transformed into something I barely recognized. Marcus worked as a junior accountant at a small firm in Phoenix, Arizona, while I had put my MBA studies on hold to support our household. His brothers Nathan and Austin were frequent visitors to our home, and together, the three of them had developed an increasingly cruel sense of humor that always seemed to target me as the punchline. "Seriously, Rebecca, you have the bladder of a toddler," Austin chimed in, elbowing me roughly in the ribs. "Maybe you should wear diapers next time we go somewhere." Nathan burst into laughter from my other side. That would actually be hilarious, can you imagine? I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation, but I forced myself to stay silent. Experience had taught me that defending myself only made their attacks worse. Marcus caught my eye in the rearview mirror, and for a moment, I hoped he might tell his brothers to back off. Instead, he just smirked and cranked up the radio volume. The truck hit a particularly rough patch of highway, and I bounced uncomfortably between the two men who seemed to take pleasure in making the journey as miserable as possible for me. Austin accidentally elbowed me again, harder this time, while Nathan spread his legs wider, forcing me into an even smaller space. When I tried to adjust my position, they both acted like I was the one being inconsiderate. "Look, there's a rest stop coming up," I said, pointing to the sign that read Barstow Rest Area, 2 miles. "Could we please stop? I really need to use the bathroom and I could stretch my legs." Marcus's eyes met mine again in the mirror, and something cold flickered across his face. "Fine," he said slowly, a strange smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "We will stop at Barstow. You can have all the time you need." Nathan and Austin exchanged a look that made my skin crawl, but I was too relieved at the prospect of getting out of the truck to pay much attention. I had no idea that this innocent request would be the catalyst for the most devastating and ultimately transformative day of my life. The rest stop appeared like a mirage in the desert, a small oasis of concrete and shade surrounded by endless stretches of barren land. As Marcus pulled into the parking area, I noticed how isolated the place was. Only 2 other vehicles were parked in the lot, and the nearest town seemed miles away in any direction. The heat shimmered off the asphalt in waves, making the distant mountains look like they were dancing. "Thank you," I said as I climbed out of the truck, grateful to escape the suffocating atmosphere inside. My legs were stiff from the cramped conditions, and I took a moment to stretch before heading toward the restroom facilities. "Take your time," Marcus called after me, that same strange smile still on his face. "We are not in any hurry." Nathan and Austin had gotten out as well, and were standing near the front of the truck, speaking in low voices. Every few seconds, one of them would glance in my direction and suppress a laugh. I felt that familiar chill of unease, but I pushed it aside. Maybe they were just planning another one of their harmless pranks. Maybe they would hide behind the building and jump out to scare me, or put something gross in my seat. I had endured worse from them before. The restroom was surprisingly clean for such a remote location, and I took a few extra minutes to splash cool water on my face and neck. The desert heat was already becoming oppressive, and I dreaded getting back into that truck for another several hours. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw a woman I barely recognized anymore. The confident, ambitious person who had once dreamed of finishing her MBA and starting her own business had been replaced by someone who spent her days walking on eggshells, trying not to provoke the next round of jokes from her husband and his brothers. When had I become so small? When had I stopped fighting back? I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who had graduated summa cum laude from Arizona State University with a degree in finance. I had been accepted into their MBA program with a partial scholarship, but Marcus had convinced me to defer my enrollment. "We need the income right now," he had said. "You can always go back to school later." That was 3 years ago, and later never seemed to come. Instead, I worked part-time at a grocery store while Marcus pursued his accounting career, promising that my turn would come eventually. His brothers never missed an opportunity to remind me that I was just a college dropout working minimum wage, conveniently forgetting that I had put my dreams on hold to support my husband's ambitions. I dried my hands and steeled myself for the return journey to the truck. Maybe if I just endured this trip, things would get better. Maybe Marcus would finally see how his brothers treated me and put a stop to it. Maybe when we got back home, I could finally have that conversation about returning to school. I walked out of the restroom and toward the parking area, squinting against the harsh desert sun. The parking lot was empty except for the 2 other vehicles I had noticed earlier. For a moment, I stood there in confusion, thinking I had somehow gotten turned around. But no, this was definitely where Marcus had parked. I could see the tire tracks in the sandy gravel, the discarded cigarette butt that Austin had flicked out the window, the small oil stain that marked the exact spot where the truck had been idling. They were gone. My heart began to race as I spun around, scanning the entire rest area for any sign of the familiar blue pickup truck. Maybe they had moved to a different parking spot. Maybe they were just playing a prank and would come driving back any second, laughing at my panic. But as the minutes ticked by and the desert silence pressed in around me, the horrible truth began to sink in. They had left me here, 315 miles from home, in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but the clothes on my back and my small purse. I fumbled for my phone, my hand shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen. No signal. Of course there was no signal. This was exactly the kind of place where cell towers were a luxury that nobody had bothered to install. I ran to the edge of the parking area, hoping to catch a glimpse of taillights disappearing down the highway. But there was nothing except endless asphalt stretching toward the horizon, heat waves distorting the distant landscape into an abstract painting of beige and brown. The temperature had to be approaching 100 degrees already, and it was not even noon yet. The 2 other vehicles in the lot belonged to truckers who were nowhere to be seen, probably asleep in their cabs during the heat of the day. I knocked on the doors anyway, desperate for help, but got no response. The rest area had a small visitor center, but when I tried the door, it was locked with a sign indicating limited hours of operation. I sank down onto a concrete bench in the shade of the building, trying to process what had just happened. This was not a prank. This was not one of their usual jokes that would be forgotten by tomorrow. This was something else entirely, something cruel and calculated that I never would have believed Marcus capable of just a few hours ago. In my purse, I found my wallet with exactly $23 in cash, a credit card that Marcus controlled, and an empty water bottle that I had drained during the first part of our journey. No phone signal, no transportation, no way to contact anyone for help. The nearest visible sign of civilization was a gas station that looked to be at least several miles away, shimmering in the distance like another mirage. As I sat there in the growing heat, watching the occasional car speed past without slowing down, I realized that my husband and his brothers had not just abandoned me in the desert. They had stripped away every illusion I had about my marriage, my worth, and my future. But they had also given me something else, something they never intended, the devastating clarity that comes when you finally see your life for what it really is. The sun climbed higher, and the concrete bench beneath me grew too hot to sit on comfortably. I moved to the small patch of shade provided by an overhang near the restrooms, but even there, the heat was becoming unbearable. My throat was already dry, and I rationed the few drops of water left in my bottle, knowing I might need them later. Every car that passed on the highway became a potential lifeline, but none of them slowed down. To them, I was just another rest stop visitor, taking a break from driving. I tried to flag down several vehicles, waving my arms and stepping closer to the road, but the drivers either did not see me or chose to ignore my obvious distress. The professional-looking woman in the silver sedan actively avoided making eye contact. The family in the minivan with children pressed against the windows drove past without even acknowledging my presence. I began to understand why Marcus had chosen this particular rest stop. It was remote enough that help was not readily available, but not so isolated that my disappearance would immediately trigger a search and rescue operation. As the afternoon wore on, the heat became dangerous. I could feel my skin burning despite staying in the shade, and my head was beginning to pound from dehydration. The empty water bottle mocked me from where it sat on the ground nearby. I had been foolish to drain it so early in the journey, but I never imagined I would need to ration water for survival. That was when I heard the sound of a diesel engine slowing down, followed by the hiss of air brakes. A large semi-truck with Texas plates was pulling into the rest area, and I felt a surge of hope mixed with fear. I had heard enough horror stories about women accepting rides from strangers, but my situation was becoming desperate enough that I was willing to take the risk. The driver who climbed down from the cab was not what I had expected. He was probably in his late 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His denim shirt was clean and pressed, and he moved with the careful deliberation of someone who spent most of his time alone on the road. "You okay, miss?" he asked, his voice carrying a gentle Texas drawl. "You look like you have been out here for a while." I tried to speak, but my throat was so dry that only a croak came out. He immediately reached into his truck and handed me a cold bottle of water from a small cooler. I drank it greedily, not caring how desperate I looked. "Easy there," he said. "You will make yourself sick drinking too fast in this heat. What happened to your ride?" When I finally managed to tell him my story, his expression changed from concern to anger. "They just left you here? Your own husband?" He shook his head in disgust. "That is not a prank. That is criminal. You could die out here." His name was Samuel Rodriguez, and he owned a large ranch outside Fresno, California. He was on his way back from delivering a load of agricultural equipment to a farm in Nevada, and my rest stop was right on his route home. "I cannot in good conscience leave you here," he said. "But I understand if you do not want to accept a ride from a stranger, we can call the police when we get to the next town, and they can sort this whole mess out." The idea of involving the police terrified me more than accepting help from this seemingly kind stranger. What would I tell them? That my husband had abandoned me as a joke? How would I explain the years of psychological abuse that had led to this moment? How would I prove that this was intentional, rather than some terrible misunderstanding? "I would be grateful for a ride," I said finally. "But I should probably call my husband first. Let him know I am okay." Samuel's expression darkened. "Miss, with all due respect, a man who would leave his wife in the desert is not someone you need to be checking in with." As Samuel's truck pulled away from the rest area, I felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. I was escaping the immediate danger of the desert heat, but I was also making a choice that would change everything. There was no going back from this moment. No pretending that what Marcus had done was acceptable or forgivable. Samuel was a thoughtful traveling companion who seemed to understand that I needed time to process what had happened. He kept the truck's air conditioning running at full blast and handed me another bottle of water without being asked. The CB radio chattered occasionally with trucker chatter, but otherwise we rode in comfortable silence as the desert landscape gradually gave way to more varied terrain. "I have been driving these roads for 30 years, Samuel said finally. "Seen all kinds of people in all kinds of situations, but what your husband did to you, that is not normal behavior. That is the kind of thing that escalates." His words sent a chill through me, because I knew he was right. The pranks and jokes had been getting meaner over the past year, more personal and humiliating. Marcus had started involving his brothers more frequently, turning our home into a place where I was constantly on guard. I had told myself it was just immaturity, that he would outgrow it eventually. But abandoning me in the desert was not immaturity. It was cruelty, with intent to cause real harm. "Do you have family you can stay with?" Samuel asked, Somewhere safe to go while you figure out your next move? I shook my head. My parents had died in a car accident 5 years earlier, and I had no siblings. Marcus's family was the only family I had left, and they clearly saw me as an outsider who could be discarded at will. The few friends I had made during college had drifted away over the years, partly because of distance, and partly because Marcus had made it clear that he did not approve of my spending time with them. "What about work?" Samuel continued gently. "Do you have a job to go back to?" The question stung, because it highlighted just how dependent I had become. My part-time position at the grocery store barely covered my personal expenses, and Marcus had made sure that all our major financial accounts were in his name only. I had access to one credit card, but it had a low limit, and he monitored every purchase. I had no savings, no independent income, and no real marketable skills beyond an unfinished college degree. "I was studying finance before I got married," I said. "I had planned to finish my MBA, maybe start my own investment consulting business someday, but that was a long time ago." Samuel glanced over at me with interest. "Finance, huh? That is interesting. I could use someone with financial knowledge on my ranch. Been trying to expand the operation, maybe diversify into some new crops, but I do not know much about investment strategies or business planning. Been flying by the seat of my pants for 25 years. It was the first time in years that someone had expressed interest in my education or potential career prospects. Marcus had dismissed my business ideas as unrealistic fantasies, and his brothers had openly mocked my academic achievements. But this stranger was talking to me like I might actually have something valuable to contribute. "I am probably pretty rusty," I said. "It has been 3 years since I was in school." "Knowledge like that does not just disappear," Samuel replied. "And sometimes a fresh perspective is exactly what a business needs. Tell you what, you help me figure out some of this financial planning stuff, and I will make sure you have a place to stay while you get back on your feet. Fair trade?" For the first time since watching Marcus drive away, I felt a glimmer of something that might have been hope. Samuel's ranch was unlike anything I had ever seen. Sprawling across several thousand acres of California's Central Valley, it was a masterpiece of agricultural engineering with irrigation systems, modern equipment, and fields of crops that stretched to the horizon. The main house was a large, comfortable adobe structure, surrounded by shade trees and flowering gardens that seemed almost magical after the barren desert I had just escaped. "This is incredible," I said, as we pulled up the long gravel driveway. "How long have you owned all this?" "Built it from nothing over the past 25 years, Samuel said with obvious pride. "Started with just 80 acres and a used tractor, but I'm not getting any younger, and I want to make sure the place can support itself for the long term. That is where you come in, if you are willing." He showed me to a small guest house behind the main residence, complete with its own kitchen, bathroom, and living area. It was modest but spotless, and after the events of the day, it felt like the most luxurious accommodation I could imagine. There was a phone on the kitchen counter, and Samuel gestured toward it. "If you want to call your husband, let him know you are safe. That is your business," he said. "But think carefully about what you want to say. Men like that, they have a way of talking women into giving them second chances they do not deserve." After Samuel left me alone, I stared at the phone for a long time. Part of me wanted to call Marcus immediately, to scream at him about what he had done and demand an explanation. But a larger part of me was afraid of what I might hear. Would he laugh about it? Would he claim it was just a joke that went too far? Would he somehow manage to make it my fault for not being able to take a joke? Instead, I called my part-time supervisor at the grocery store and told her I would not be coming in anymore. It was the first time in years that I had made a unilateral decision about my employment without consulting Marcus first. The act of quitting felt both terrifying and liberating. That evening, Samuel brought over a stack of financial documents and spread them across the dining table in the guest house. "I warned you I was flying by the seat of my pants," he said with a rueful smile. "These are 3 years of tax returns, profit and loss statements, and some investment portfolios that my old accountant set up before he retired." I need someone to make sense of it all and tell me where I should be putting my money. So, as I began reviewing the documents, I felt my dormant analytical skills awakening like muscles that had been asleep for too long. Samuel's ranch was profitable, but not nearly as profitable as it could be. His investment portfolio was conservative to the point of being stagnant, and he was missing dozens of opportunities for tax advantages and business expansion that were practically glaring off the pages at me. "You are sitting on a gold mine," I told him after 2 hours of review, "but you are barely scratching the surface of what this operation could become." Samuel leaned back in his chair and studied me with a thoughtful expression. "Show me," he said. I spent the next 3 hours outlining a comprehensive business plan that included crop diversification, strategic investments in agricultural technology, and a marketing strategy that would allow him to sell directly to high-end restaurants and organic food distributors. By the time we finished, Samuel was looking at me like I had just performed magic. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked. "I told you," I said, feeling more confident than I had in years. "I was studying finance." 2 years later, I stood at the podium of the Grand Ballroom in the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco, looking out at an audience of some of the most powerful investors in the world. My company, Desert Bloom Capital, had grown from a single client ranch to managing over $500 million in assets, specializing in sustainable agricultural investments that consistently outperformed the market by significant margins. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said into the microphone, my voice steady and confident, "sustainable agriculture is not just the future of farming, it is the future of smart investing." The audience listened intently as I outlined the portfolio strategies that had made my clients wealthy while supporting environmentally responsible farming practices. In the 2 years since Samuel had found me walking along that desert highway, I had discovered a talent for financial analysis that surpassed anything I had imagined during my college years. My recommendations had helped Samuel expand his ranch into a multi-million-dollar operation, and word of my success had spread throughout California's agricultural community. Desert Bloom Capital now managed investment portfolios for ranch owners, organic food companies, and sustainable technology developers across 3 states. I had bought a mansion in Napa Valley, driven a Tesla, and been featured on the cover of Agricultural Investment Quarterly. The scared, abandoned woman who had been left at that rest stop no longer existed. "The key to successful agricultural investing," I continued, "is understanding that sustainability and profitability are not opposing forces. They are complementary strategies that create long-term value while protecting our natural resources." I was halfway through explaining a particularly successful investment in water conservation technology when a commotion erupted near the back of the ballroom. Security guards were trying to stop someone from entering the restricted conference area, but the person was pushing past them with determination. "Rebecca!" a familiar voice shouted across the room. "This disappearing act ends now. You need to come home." The entire ballroom fell silent as Marcus pushed past the security guards and strode down the center aisle toward the stage. He looked older, thinner, and desperate in a way that would have once made me feel sorry for him. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and there was a wild look in his eyes that suggested he had been searching for me for a very long time. "You cannot just run away from your marriage," he shouted, pointing an accusing finger at me. "I have been looking for you for 2 years. Do you have any idea what you have put me through?" I paused my presentation and looked down at him calmly, feeling the eyes of 300 influential investors watching this confrontation unfold. These were people who controlled billions of dollars in assets, who had flown in from around the world to hear my market analysis, and who were now witnessing my husband's public meltdown. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said into the microphone, my voice carrying clearly throughout the ballroom, "I would like you to meet Marcus Collins. This is the man who abandoned me in the Barstow Desert 315 miles from home because he thought my dependence on him was amusing." The audience gasped audibly, and I could see several prominent investors exchanging shocked glances. Marcus's face went pale as he realized he had just interrupted a room full of some of the most powerful people in California's financial community. "You are embarrassing yourself," Marcus said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Come home and stop this ridiculous gold digger charade." James Whitfield, a billionaire investor I had been working with for 6 months, stood up from his front row seat. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "But did you just call one of our most successful fund managers a gold digger?" The room erupted in murmurs of outrage as Marcus realized the magnitude of his mistake. Security guards flanked him on both sides, waiting for my signal to remove him from the premises. I looked down at the man who had once controlled every aspect of my life and felt nothing but pity for how small he appeared in that moment. "Gentlemen," I said to the security team, "please escort Mr. Collins from the building, and make sure he understands that he is not welcome at any future events." As they led Marcus away, still shouting about his rights as my husband, I turned back to my presentation slides and continued exactly where I had left off, as if nothing had happened at all. Within days of Marcus's public humiliation at the investment conference, the video of his outburst had gone viral across social media platforms, with financial industry insiders sharing it as an example of toxic masculinity in action. Nathan's wife Jennifer filed for divorce immediately after seeing the footage, telling everyone who would listen that she could not remain married to someone capable of such cruelty. Austin's girlfriend Ashley broke up with him publicly, posting a scathing breakup letter on Facebook that detailed exactly what she thought of men who abandoned women in the desert for entertainment. Their parents, Frank and Carol, were forced to leave their church congregation in Phoenix when the story reached local news outlets, eventually relocating to a small town in Oregon where nobody knew their family name. All 3 brothers lost their jobs when the viral video reached their employers, and no financial institution in California would hire any of them after their names became associated with the scandal. Marcus was fired from his accounting firm within 48 hours of the conference incident, and the 3 brothers found themselves blacklisted from their entire industry. Within 2 years, they had all filed for bankruptcy, as legal fees mounted from multiple lawsuits, including a civil case I filed for emotional distress and abandonment. They were eventually forced to take minimum wage jobs under assumed names in different states, their reputation so toxic that even basic employment became nearly impossible in their home state. As I rang the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange for Desert Bloom Capital's latest fund launch, watching financial reporters capture the moment for the evening news, I reflected on how their cruel abandonment had inadvertently forced me to discover a financial genius I never knew existed within myself. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that could have happened. And I was grateful every day that Marcus had been foolish enough to show me exactly who he really was before I wasted any more years trying to please him.